Hi, my name's Tony Chavez. Welcome back to It Is Also Written Ministry. Today's topic, we'll be discussing the signs of Jonah, this all inspirational and inspiring perspective that many have misunderstood and misinterpreted. Here are three questions that either have been misunderstood or misinterpreted. First one is whether Jesus, in order to fulfill the sign of Jonah, was 3 days and 3 nights in the grave. Or number two, whether the sign was fulfilled in some other way. And number three, whether he was, that is Jesus, whether Jesus was crucified on Friday or on Thursday or on Wednesday. There still seems to be some points which are not clear to all. And we need to make these clear today. We need to know exactly why we believe and what we believe. So first of which underlines the question, was Christ crucified on the day the leaven was put out of the houses, that is on the 14th day? Mark, who was an eyewitness of the event, says, "And the first day of the unleavened bread, when they killed the Passover, his disciples said unto him, Where wilt thou that we go and prepare that thou may eat the Passover? And he sendeth forth 2 of his disciples, and said unto them, Go ye into the city, and there shall meet a man bearing a pitch of water. Follow him. And his disciples went forth and came into the city, and found as he had said unto them. And they made ready the Passover. And in the evening he cometh with his 12. And as they sat and did eat, Jesus said, Verily I say unto you, one of which eateth with me shall betray me. Since the Passover lamb was killed in the evening of the 14th day of the first month, Exodus 12:6, and was eaten at the commencement of the 15th day, Numbers 28:17. And since the gospel writers declared that Jesus ate the Passover at the very hour the whole Jewish nation ate it, the fact is solidly established that the time of the crucifixion of Christ did not coincide with the time of the killing of the lamb on the 14th day for the first of the Passover feasts. It did coincide, however, with the killing of the lamb for the second of the feast, as we will see as we continue to move forward in our discussion today. Even astronomical records agree that the 14th day sacrifice of the Passover supper that year came on Wednesday, and the Bible emphatically states that the feast of the Passover was to be observed on the 15th day, that is Numbers chapter 28 verse 17, Thursday that year. Jesus therefore could not have been crucified on either of these 2 days. This is borne out with the fact that, as stated before, he observed the first of the feast with his disciples. Moreover, Matthew 26, verse 5, plainly states that the assembly of the priests and the scribes with Caiaphas in the judgment seat decided not to kill him on the feast day, Thursday, the 15th. Hence the question, why does the Bible say he was crucified on the preparation day? Mark's statement, the preparation, that is, the day before the Sabbath, Mark 15, verse 42, explains that this preparation day was Friday, the day before the Sabbath. And as this same Sabbath, John calls a high day, John 19:31. It could only have been the 7th-day Sabbath in the Passover week, a Sabbath within a Sabbath, for the Passover week was a 7-day occasion, Numbers 28:17, and therefore in each week of Passover there was a 7th-day Sabbath, and hence 2 holy days in 1 day, and high day. Although in the scriptures a group of feast days are sometimes called the Sabbath days or Sabbaths, the Passover in itself is never called the Sabbath. This is especially true throughout the New Testament, and for any of the apostles to call the Passover day the Sabbath day is for them not only to ignore reason, but also to confuse the Passover with the 7th-day Sabbath, the only day ever called the Sabbath. Thus, from this angle also, it is made clear that the preparation day, that is the day that Jesus was crucified, which was Friday, the preparation for the Sabbath in the Passover week, that the Passover lamb, which was killed on Wednesday, the 14th day, did not coincide with the crucifixion, and that Jesus ate the Passover on Thursday, the 15th day, was arrested the same day before daybreak, crucified Friday, the 16th, buried before the Sabbath, and resurrected on Sunday, the 18th. These biblical facts, which are supported also by tradition, give rise to the question, was not Jesus 3 days and 3 nights in the tomb? Let it not be forgotten that he was buried on the day called the preparation day, that's Friday, and that the chief priest and the Pharisees went to Pilate on the day that followed the day of the preparation. See that in Matthew 27, verse 62, on the Sabbath, requesting him to set a watch over the tomb. It was therefore the second night after his burial that the tomb was guarded. And the fact that this was the night that Jesus arose, Matthew 28, 1 through 5, proves that he was in the tomb only 2 nights, Friday night and Saturday night. Consequently, the statement 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth must stand for something more than simply his being in the grave as interpreted by some. Then in Matthew 28, verse 1, the words, "As it began to draw toward the first day of the week," are not spoken with the intention to tell the time when Jesus arose, but to show the time when the women arrived at the tomb, and therefore cannot be taken to mean, as some think, the evening at the end of the Sabbath. For the woman came to the sepulchre in the morning, as each gospel writer attests. Luke states, "Now upon the first day of the week, very early in the morning, they came unto the sepulchre," Luke 24:1. Mark has to say, "And very early in the morning, the first day of the week, they came into the sepulchre at the rising of the sun," Mark 16:2. John says, "The first day of the week cometh Mary Magdalene early, when it was yet dark, unto the sepulchre," John 20, verse 1. And finally, Matthew says, "In the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week." Now notice, it didn't say, not as it began to turn toward the first night of the week. No, it says, it began to dawn toward the first day of the week, came Mary Magdalene and the other Mary to see the sepulchre, Matthew 28, verse 1. The statement that Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to see the sepulchre as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week, Matthew 28, 1, has been interpreted by some to mean that they came to the sepulchre on the Sabbath before sunset, and then found that the Lord had already risen. But let it be remembered that on the day when they came, Mary met the Lord himself and talked with him. If therefore she was told on the Sabbath by the angel that Jesus had risen from the dead, and she herself then saw the sepulchre empty, also talked with the Lord, Matthew 28, 1 through 9, then why should she play the fool on Sunday morning by going to the sepulchre to see the Lord's body as though she knew nothing about his resurrection, when instead she should have heeded his instructions to give the news to the disciples and to meet him in Galilee? That's Matthew 28, 1 through 7, and also John 20, verses 1 through 17. In Mark 16, verses 1 and 2, and Luke 24, 1 through 10, also John 20, verse 1, bear threefold proof that in regard to the Lord's resurrection, Mary Magdalene knew nothing before Sunday morning. And when to her surprise the angel said, "He is risen, he is not here. Behold the place where they laid him. But go your way and tell the disciples and Peter that he goeth before you into Galilee. There shall you see him." Mark 16, verses 6 and 7. Then too, Mark says that Jesus was risen early the first day of the week, and also that on the first day of the week, not on the Sabbath, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene. That's Mark 16, verse 9. So those therefore who interpret the words as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week to mean that it was late Sabbath afternoon and that Jesus was then risen are in serious error. So Mark says when the Sabbath was past, whereas Matthew says in the end of the Sabbath. In another instance, the one says very early in the morning, the first day of the week, whereas the others say as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week. These comparative phrases all have the same significance. And furthermore, a comparison of Matthew 28 verse 1 and John chapter 20 verse 1 shows that both scriptures refer to one and the same event. Though many try to refute the fact, John says that the woman came to the sepulchre the first day of the week when it was yet dark. So we see here that this cannot mean in the end of the Sabbath as the sun was about to set. For had it been that time, John would not have said when it was yet dark, plainly indicating that the night had almost worn away, but not completely. And Matthew, speaking of the same event, says, in the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week. Thus, in the light of all the Gospels, the word dawn can be interpreted to mean only the breaking of day, the morning. The English dictionary also supports this definition. Now, even a cursory analysis of these four synoptic passages can result in but one conclusion, that all four observers are writing of the same event, that is, the visit of Mary Magdalene and the other Mary to the tomb of the same place, that is, Christ's sepulchre, and at the same time early in the morning, the first day of the week, only each stating the matter in his own words, a threefold conclusion which is further borne out by examining the subject from the angle of the hour of each event. Now, anciently, the time-place was regulated at 12 sunset. Midnight and noon were at the 6th hour, and the morning at the 12th hour. From the original system of timekeeping, the record in connection with the trial and with the crucifixion is made as follows. Now, John's record of the trial states that Jesus in Pilate's judgment hall at about the 6th hour, that's John chapter 19, verse 14, whereas Mark records of the crucifixion states that Jesus was hanging on the cross on the 6th hour. That's Mark 15:33. Obviously, these 6 hours cannot be the same. For at the first 6 hour, he was on trial in Pilate's judgment hall, whereas at the next 6 hour, 3 hours after he was crucified and while he was hanging on the cross, the sun became darkened after the 3 hours, from the 6th hour to the 9th hour, when the sun again appeared. Look at Mark 15:33. When Jesus died, Mark 15:37. But there still being another private opinion on this point, we shall analyze a resultant question. Was not the time then designated by watches? To attempt to construe the hours on record as watches, periods of 4 hours, rather than the actual hours of day and night, is to strain reason to a breaking point in the interest of the idea that all in connection with the Passover, the trial, and the crucifixion took place in one day. As far as we know, all Bible students agree that Jesus was crucified during the day and was buried before sunset. And as only the hours of the night were ever reckoned by watches, the watch periods are foolishly dragged into the discussion. So being wholly irrelevant in this connection, they by all rights merit no consideration. For the sake, however, of those who really want the truth, but who are confused over the idea under discussion, we shall give it a brief treatment. As the watch theory cannot be imposed upon the hours during the day, we have no choice but to conclude that Jesus was crucified at the actual hour, that is the 3rd hour, according to Mark 15:25. That 3 hours later, the sun was darkened at the actual 6th hour, that would be Mark 15:33, and after that, 3 more hours. Jesus died and the sun again appeared at the actual 9th hour of the day. Look at Mark 15:34 through 37, and not at a certain watch of the night. And as there are only 2 6 hours, but only 1 6 hour in a day, therefore the 6th hour at the time of the trial in Pilate's judgment hall, and the 6th hour at the time of the darkness of the sun, which came 3 hours after Jesus was nailed to the cross, are not 4 hours apart, but either 12 or 24 hours apart. So manifestly, therefore, even though one resorts to the device of the watch system, one cannot rationally conclude that the trial and the darkening of the sun, not to mention the events connected with them, came the same day. Necessarily, they took longer, a lot longer. Then, too, as there are 12 hours or 4 watches between this particular trial and the darkening of the sun, and as he was crucified at the 3rd hour, 9 hours after the trial and 3 hours before the time that the sun was darkened, it is folly to try to crowd this actual 12-hour period into a 4-hour watch. And still worse folly, it is to try to do so if the trial were at Thursday noon. The gospel writers do not mean watches when they say hours, for Jesus did not teach them to say these are 4 watches in a day, but rather there are 12 hours in the day. Look at John 11, verse 9. Moreover, as aforestated, never the day, but only the night was divided into watches. And furthermore, the clock dials were never marked by watches, but by hours. And when they say hours, they never meant watches. These evidences wholly discredit the watch scheme of interpretation. Hold not to what fabricated ideas seem to make the scriptures say, but grip tenaciously to what the word, in simplicity, plainly says. Following this procedure, let us now review the study in the ensuing summary. As we look at the hours of the night and the hours of the day, that's sunset at night and sunrise during the day, By checking on the diagram above, the hours mentioned by the gospel writers, the readers will see that there is no possible way by which to make these events occupy one day only. To begin with, check the first 6 hours, the trial, John 19:14, then check the third hour, the crucifixion, Mark 15:25. Next, check the second 6th hour, the darkening of the sun, in that's Mark 15:33, then the 9th hour. The 9th hour is the death, Mark 15:34 through 38. And last, the 12th hour, the burial, which is Mark 15:42 and verse 46. From this, it will be seen that all these events did not take place in one 12-hour day, and that necessarily, therefore, Christ was brought before Pilate either at midnight preceding Friday morning or at noon Thursday. To determine which, need only consult John's record of the trial, which disallows the midday time of Thursday, for it says it was the preparation of the Passover, John 19:14. And as this preparation day was Friday, we can only conclude that Jesus was brought before Pilate at about midnight, the 6th hour, on what we call Thursday night. But what, according to Genesis chapter 1 and according to the Jewish Sabbath keeping, actually was Friday. Accordingly, Jesus was arrested early Thursday morning and tried before Ananias while it was yet dark, John 18:13. Brought before Caiaphas in the assembly of the Sanhedrin, his legal trial at daybreak, Matthew 26:57 and chapter 27 verse 1. Next before Pilate, Friday before daybreak, about the 6th hour, John chapter 19:14. Then before Herod, Luke 23 verse 7. Then back to Pilate, Luke 23:11, and finally was crucified in the morning of the same day about the 3rd hour, Mark 15:25. That would be 9 a.m. modern time. This time record shows that his capture, his trial, and his crucifixion was carefully and cunningly prearranged to take place at night and early in the morning to prevent any uproar, for they feared the people. Luke 20 verse 19. So we see that he remained in the tomb 2 nights and rose on Sunday, and that 3 days, 3 nights is the time from his first legal trial to the time of his resurrection, that the heart of the earth has been erroneously interpreted to mean the grave, when instead it is, as Jonah's experience showed, symbolically of Christ's imprisonment in the hands of sinners and in the tomb. Thus it is written, and thus it behooved Christ to suffer and to rise from the dead the 3rd day, that the sign of the 3 days and 3 nights literally is fulfilled from Thursday morning, the time of his legal trial, to Sunday morning when he arose, that the Paschal lamb, which was about to be killed when Jesus was on the cross, was not that which was killed on the first day of the Passover week, the 14th day of the month, but that which was killed on the 16th day, the 2nd day of the feast. All these conclusions are firmly founded on the solid fact established herein in simplicity. Or not, dear reader, on fables, or on translations unknown to you, or on so-called original manuscripts which you yourself cannot read, or which are not accessible to you, and some of which do not even exist. As always, we see here that the Bible is its only and best interpreter. Now continue with It Is Also Written Ministry as we continue to break down the sign of Jonah.